Welcome to today's program, Downtown Revitalization, What Works? My name is Roberta Schaefer, and I'm the president of the Research Bureau. We'd like to express our gratitude to the Mass College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences for hosting today's event, and bringing greetings from the college today is the General Counsel, Deborah O'Malley. Deborah?
Thank you, Roberta. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. I'm Deborah O'Malley, the college's General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer, and I'm going to take just a couple more minutes than a usual welcome speaker takes because of the college's success in the urban revitalization of Worcester. The president, I bring you greetings from the president, and he is especially sorry he couldn't be here today given the topic and all he's done to revitalize not just Worcester, but the other. Many people don't realize that Worcester is not the main campus of the college. The college is 190 years old, the oldest college in the city of Boston, and has a main campus in the Longwood medical area of Boston, and has been there for 150 years. The Longwood medical area, if you know Boston, borders Mission Hill, a Boston neighborhood, and the president has done equally as much in Boston in the urban revitalization of Mission Hill. The college also has a campus in Manchester, New Hampshire, right downtown, where the college owns 4 or 5 buildings and has contributed to the urban revitalization of downtown Manchester. The president wanted to be here, and he gave me specific instructions. If anyone you know Charlie, you know they're specific, is what I'm supposed to say, and he'll see it on Channel 3 some night. Watching it, so I'm going to say what he told me to say. The president has, despite what people think, the president's mission is not the revitalization of downtown Worcester. The president is merely a byproduct of his 15 years as president of the college, and I think another maybe 12 years before that on the Board of Trustees. The president has strived to grow the college's mission, and so you know, I'm supposed to say this, I'm going to tell you, the college offers 45 degrees in many areas other than pharmacy. We offer degrees in nursing, physical therapy, physician assistant studies, dental hygiene, radiological studies, pre-med, and as many of you have watched the new building down on the site of the old Crown Plaza pool, the new building that's gone up, that's going to be the home of the college's newest program, which is the School of Optometry, with students arriving in the fall. The president had a vision. He's from Worcester, as you know. He went to the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy, but he had a vision when he became president. There's not 1 inch of square inch of space on Longwood Avenue to expand. That's where Harvard Medical School is, Children's Hospital, Brigham and Women's. 50,000 people work in the Longwood medical area. He wanted to grow the school, so he came to Worcester in 2000, starting with the building next door at 19 Foster Street, and then this building, and now the college has bought and renovated 9 buildings in the city. The college has over 1,000 students in Worcester, 150 faculty and staff, and has created a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day presence in downtown Worcester. Your topic today is what works. The president thinks he knows. What he did was create the need for the revitalization of the real estate. He grew the business of the college. He expects to have new programs in the city and to double the current 1,000 students to probably 2,000 students or more in the next couple of years, which will continue the growth of the campus in downtown Worcester. The colleges and the president have been very generous. 100 different nonprofits and government entities use the college's facilities every year. This conference room, they use our lecture halls, which adds to the activity downtown. So what works? I guess the president works. His view works. And we want to thank you for your support of the college. The college couldn't be as successful without everyone in the city pulling for the college and cooperating with the college. Mayor Lukes is here, former Mayor Lukes, we thank her. We thank all Tim and his team, the city manager, and we look for your continued support. So welcome and have a good time.
Thank you, Deborah, and again, thank you to the college for enabling us to use this space on a regular basis. You've been extremely generous, and we really do appreciate it. Today's program is part of the Research Bureau's Francis Harrington Forums on Municipal Government, and we're grateful to our presenting sponsor, Commerce Bank, and our 2012 leadership sponsor, Polar Beverages. And today's event sponsor is Fallon Community Health Plan, and I see a lot of folks from the plan, and thank you very much for your support as well. The Research Bureau also wishes to express its appreciation to the Telegram and Gazette for advertising today's event, and the City of Worcester Government Channel under the direction of Judy Warren for videotaping it. And be sure to visit our website at wrrb.org, where you can read and download all the Research Bureau reports as well as announcements of upcoming events and highlights of past events. Quick reminder, the Research Bureau's 27th annual meeting will be held on May 30th. The invitations are just going out, and there are a lot of invitations available in the back. It's going to be at 4:30 at the DCU Center. Thank you, Sandy. And we're pleased to announce that Eric Rosengren, who is the president of the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston, will be the featured speaker this year. Again, invitations are available on our website, or you can call the Research Bureau office. And we want to thank our growing list of sponsors for that event and for all our other work that we're doing. Today's forum is the latest in the Research Bureau's longstanding interest in tracking trends and developments in downtown Worcester, studying models of successful urban revitalization elsewhere, and suggesting programs and policies that might be replicated here. For those of you who want some additional background, our March report on benchmarking economic development in Worcester provides a list of downtown projects currently underway and the fiscal impact of downtown. We want to mention that this report is sponsored with the generous funds from Mass Development, and we've been issuing that report since 2001, and it's available on our website. While Worcester's downtown properties contribute less than 6% of the city's total tax levy, downtowns can play an enormous role in shaping a city's reputation and the reputation of the local economy. So it is very important that we get this right, and we hope that the panel today contributes to the dialogue. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Tim McGurthy, who is serving as today's moderator. Tim is the Chief Development Officer for the City of Worcester and the Chief Executive Officer of the Worcester Redevelopment Authority. He's a member of the City Manager's Cabinet and oversees Worcester's planning, economic development, and workforce development activities. And prior to his work in Worcester, Tim was the Director of Policy for the Boston Redevelopment Authority, Boston's planning and economic development agency. He also worked for the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Commonwealth of Virginia's Governor's Office. He's a graduate of the College of William and Mary and holds a master's degree from Johns Hopkins and a master's in public policy and urban planning from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School. Please join me in welcoming our own Tim McGurthy.
Thank you, Roberta, and thanks to all of you for being here. And I do want to thank especially just Roberta, the Research Bureau team, Stephen and Jean, for putting on forums like this. It's a great opportunity for Worcester to step back and take a look at ourselves, which is something we don't often have the luxury of doing and the opportunity to do in a forum where it's a real discussion of what is it we should be doing and how are we going along the path that we've chosen. We don't all have the president to turn to say, how do we do it better? He's here, but he's not always in reach. So, and I do want to thank Mass College of Pharmacy and Deb and the team there for hosting these events. They've always been accessible to us. They've always been a great partner in what it is we're trying to do here. And as she said, the college has been a major element in the transformation of downtown Worcester. Worcester's an interesting city. It's a city that we always, kind of celebrate our neighborhoods, but the downtown is always that piece that we struggle over. And it's one that it's a city that will forever be defined by the success that comes with that downtown. So it's obviously an important part of how we as a city, we as an economic development entity, approach growth. For Worcester to be a truly mixed-use community, a community that appeals to all, it needs to have that residential base, but also that commercial base. We need to be a place that people can live and work, and do it in a format where it's convenient, it's friendly, it's something that kind of makes it a great livable city. That makes downtown especially important. As in all downtowns, the downtown of Worcester is the heart of the city. It's the place where government is located. It's the place where commerce, major commerce happens. It's our largest employment area. And it's the place where the transportation nodes come together. It is also a center for culture, medicine, education. But I put an asterisk on that one because the benefit of Worcester, but the drawback of Worcester in some ways for its downtown is it's very spread out. We have culture going on throughout the city, over 70 members of the Worcester Cultural Coalition spread throughout the city. We have medicine going on throughout the city. We have St. Vincent downtown, UMass over on the edge of Lake Quinsigamond. And we have education, Mass College of Pharmacy, WPI, Becker here within the downtown area, but then we also have the other colleges spread throughout the city. So while downtown is an important nexus for those activities, it's not the sole nexus. And while we don't want to pile everything into the downtown, we do want to improve on the connections between those areas and the center of the city. And importantly, as I mentioned, downtown is the symbol of Worcester's success. We may have the most vibrant, wonderful neighborhoods and neighborhood centers, but until that downtown starts to transform and become a true meeting place and community center, we'll always be judged as that type of city, as the city that is reflected in how it treats its core. And that's the piece. Downtown is not, and I could get in trouble for saying this, but right now, downtown is not the central meeting place for Worcester. It's not the place where all people from all residents, all neighborhoods come together. It's not the center for shopping or living. People don't come downtown when they need to do their kind of basic necessities or their luxury items, the things that they're looking for. And as mentioned, it's not the sole place to take part in the vitality of the city, the culture, the education, all those attributes that make Worcester a wonderful place are spread beyond our core. And so the question is, how do we transform that? We've had some significant projects and significant investments underway. Over $2 billion, either under construction or in the pipeline in Worcester right now, $2 billion worth of development. Over $5 billion annually in payroll is paid to people working in the city of Worcester. How do we capture more of that money and make it work for the greater community benefit? Projects, major projects, City Square, Gateway Park, the investments of Mass College and WPI in the Gateway Park and Lincoln Square areas. Union Station, the changes going on at Union Station in terms of public transportation, the CSX project, additional commuter rail, WRTA and the new WRTA hub that's under construction. The Theater District Initiative, the transformation around the Hanover Theater, WBDC's efforts with the Telegram and Gazette building. How do we build that to make it a more mixed-use community, a mixed-use area? All of these things will help change that perception of downtown, help move us along that path to creating that true central gathering place. And so that's the piece that we're here to learn more about other communities and how they did it, and to learn how we as a community should do it better. It is a joint effort. This is not the city government's role to transform downtown. It's all of our roles as members of a community, public and private. I think in each one of these cases, I hope I'm right, we'll hear how it's been a kind of the private investment that's been a key piece of that public work and the leverage that the public piece will accomplish. So I'm pleased to have speakers here that represent a number of different areas. Lowell and Providence are two rivals in many ways in terms of our efforts for success. So heckling is encouraged and allowed. And then Mayo Group, which represents the private investment going on here in the city. And I think you'll find quite a bit of interesting information about what Mayo has tapped into and what they recognize about downtown Worcester. So with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers and give them a chance to talk a little bit about what they've experienced in the changes going on in their areas particularly. Our first speaker will be Adam Backey. Adam is the Assistant City Manager and Director of Development and Planning for the City of Lowell. And I will say I've worked with Adam on a number of initiatives as part of the Gateway Cities effort. He's absolutely committed to downtowns, committed to cities, and helping to bring new revitalization beyond the 128 boundary. How do we create more opportunity throughout Massachusetts? Adam acted as project manager and principal author for the City of Lowell's first comprehensive master plan in 30 years, and the comprehensive redrafting of the city's entire zoning code and map, which I can attest to. That's an extremely difficult but amazing accomplishment, between 2001 and 2004. He also conceived of and continues to lead the implementation of the Hamilton Canal District, one of New England's most dramatic mixed-use, transit-oriented development projects. Adam holds degrees from Cornell and from the UMass Boston's McCormick Institute. Before coming to Lowell, he worked as a planner, historic preservationist, and designer of museum exhibits, theater scenery, and special events in upstate New York, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. So I'm pleased to introduce Adam Backey.
While I get the PowerPoint up, I certainly want to thank Tim for that introduction, and also very much thank the Research Bureau for inviting me here. And equally importantly, I certainly want to thank the college for hosting this event in such a great venue, but more importantly for all of the work that the college seems to be doing in downtown Worcester. And if you're interested in yet another campus, I've got a great location that you might want to consider. It certainly sounds like you've got a predilection for urban locations. I'm here to talk a little bit about downtown Lowell, and I suspect this slide captures a bit about why you may have chosen to invite me. It's not necessarily the work that I have personally done, but the work that's occurred in our community. In the 1970s, I don't think anyone would have been inviting Lowell to any event anywhere to talk about urban renaissance or success. We had over 5 million square feet of vacant mill buildings alone. That's not even counting all the commercial buildings and the other buildings that were also predominantly vacant in our downtown. And over the last 30 or 40 years now, we've seen over 80% of them adaptively reused, converted to new uses. We have another 9 or 10% that are under construction. And we think by 2016 or so, based on the development projects that are in the works right now in various stages of financing and design and so forth, that we'll get that up to about 95% of our mills revitalized. And I think when I try to think of what is a good metric for whether a community has succeeded or failed in terms of urban revitalization, I mean, it can be a very difficult concept to wrap your hands around, and it certainly is something that is always ongoing. But one of the best metrics I can think of is if you had a lot of vacant buildings and you don't anymore, that sure feels like at least progress in the right direction. We, however, did not always, I think, have the best strategy in mind. Back in the 1950s, we invited some folks up from Tim's alma mater at Harvard to come tell us what we should do in Lowell, and they came up with this great model. And I know you probably can't read the caption down at the bottom, but I'll give you the highlight. And the highlight was that we were going to demolish the majority of downtown and create 6,000 surface parking spaces within an easy walk of Merrimack Street. Now, what one would have wanted to drive to or walk to after that, I'm not really sure. But essentially, this sort of embodies a concept that a lot of cities, including Lowell, clearly embraced at the time when they looked around and saw that the suburbs in the years after World War II seemed to be doing really well, and thought, well, let's just do what they're doing and we'll do just as well as they are doing. And unfortunately, what the logic or the failure of that logic is that if you're going to start the debate trying to figure out how to be a better suburb and you're a city, you're probably going to lose to the suburbs. But instead, I think the better strategy is to think about what makes a city a great place, what's appealing about a city, and be the best city that you can be. And if you're playing on that playing field, places like Lowell and certainly Worcester, and I'm sure you'll hear of Providence and others, are in I think, a much better place. And if you want any measure of the success of that initiative, this is what Lowell looked like in the 1970s, shortly, 20 years after embracing that vision. However, in the 1970s also is really when Lowell started to turn the corner and began to embrace a very different strategy. And there were a number of facets to this. I think that the two most important, one that's a pretty well-known story, is the creation of the Lowell National Historical Park and the embrace of historic preservation as part of a development strategy and an economic development strategy, which prior to that time was considered antithetical. Historic preservation was about places where George Washington slept and had absolutely nothing to do with economic development, really until places like Lowell and a few other communities at that time began to see that there was a nexus between the two. And I think the other thing that was extremely important that started in Lowell in the 70s in earnest is the concept of partnerships. And everybody talks about public-private partnerships and so forth. And I think what Lowell has done a little bit differently than a lot of communities is truly institutionalizing the concept of partnership efforts toward economic development. And I would be lying to you if I stood up here and told you that everyone in Lowell always agrees about everything, even in the realm of economic development. We certainly have plenty of good fights. But one of the things that happens in Lowell is when a significant idea related to economic development is embraced, it's generally embraced by almost everyone. And there are forums that are institutionalized in the community to get the business community, the banking community, the political leaders, the appointed public officials, the institutional leaders in the community to all get on the same page and work together toward that vision and figure out what people can do toward that vision. And many of the organizations, chief among them the Lowell Plan and the Lowell Development Financial Corporation, were created in the 70s and really grew out of that and have now created a kind of culture in the community that reinforces that concept. And certainly I'm pleased to see the breadth of people here in this room this morning, and I think this really is the kind of collection of interests and people that will really, I think, drive that kind of success. Soon after the founding of the National Park, there was a significant wave of redevelopment and restoration of particularly the exteriors of a lot of significant downtown buildings. These are just a handful of before and after photos of some of the projects that got done, particularly in the 80s. Some of them pretty significant transformations. That building in the back of the parking lot there really is the same building that now has its roof restored and is part of the National Park experience in Lowell. This is, again, similar to the photo I showed you before. This is what most of the mills looked like, in the 70s, some of them as recently as the early 2000s. And as you can see, with restoration, they start to take on a whole new character and really add to the character of the city as opposed to detracting. Believe it or not, those really are the same building also. And if you give any sense of the range of things we're willing to embrace if it helps to reinforce buildings or restore buildings, this one, the one on the right, is now a home for retired oblate priests. And they decided that they wanted to take on this building because there was a small church that the Jesuits run in downtown Lowell, and they were having trouble getting enough priests to host all their masses. And they figured if they had retired priests living next door, they'd have a better shot. It seems to have worked. Again, this one's sort of interesting because I'm sure many of you know Paul Tsongas by reputation, if not personally, or knew of Paul Tsongas. Interestingly, one of his early campaign offices is actually in the picture of the before picture of the restoration of this building. This building is still in process, and when we talk about the investment that colleges make, Middlesex Community College is actually in the process of finishing the restoration of this building into their arts facility. But historic preservation was only a piece of the puzzle, and in fact, in spite of all of the historic preservation work that took place in the 1980s, by the early 1990s, Lowell was actually in probably worse shape than it had been throughout most of the 1980s, and that was as a result of the recession that generally hit New England in the late 80s, early 90s, which hit the banking sector, which had a large presence in Lowell, particularly hard, but also hit the high-tech sector. And one of the companies that didn't make it out was the Wang Corporation, which throughout the 1980s had employed, either directly or indirectly, practically everybody in Lowell. And when they rapidly shrank to a very small company, it left Lowell in a pretty tough spot. And so pretty much all you heard about Lowell in the early 1990s were the crime stories that were reported by Fox News. However, we had this fantastic sort of restored downtown that when people came to it, they were really impressed by the physical environment. And when we talk about shifting a strategy to how you make a city, how you compete on the playing field of being an interesting city and an interesting downtown, the importance of the quality of place can't be underestimated. But you have to get people there. So one of the things the city embraced in the 90s was the development of large event venues that were used to bring people from who had left the city for the suburbs, to give them a positive reason to come back. And oh, by the way, while they're in downtown, they will notice and appreciate what the downtown potentially has, and that it might be a little different than the version that they were seeing on Fox News. Not to pick on Fox, I think the other networks were treating the city about the same way. Following the movement towards sports, we looked at how do we start to actually now bring people into the community, not just to visit, but to make more of a long-term investment. And the city looked at the arts as both a key for being kind of a pioneering, leading edge group of folks that would be interested in coming into an urban area that was in the process of coming back. But also, once they were here, they would significantly enhance the vitality and energy of the community in a way that made it all that much more attractive for others to come into the city. And this is just, I don't need to read you the slide, but you can see this is the breadth of the arts and cultural offerings that are in the city now. One project that's particularly significant, a couple that are particularly significant that I'll point out. One is Western Avenue Studios, which is an old mill complex that is now home to over 250 working artists, and we believe it is probably the largest concentration of artist studios in any one building anywhere in New England. Can't say that for absolute certainty, but we haven't found one that's larger. What's interesting about it is at the moment that is all just working studios. It is not a live-work project, and it is all truly artists. They are in the process right now of adding about 50 units of live workspace, because many of those artists who have their studios there have asked if they could actually live in the building as well, and that's in progress. Another project that's significant is the Appleton Mills, which is the first building of that Hamilton Canal District that was mentioned in the generous introduction. And that is 130 units of affordable artist housing that converted one of the most derelict and deteriorated buildings that was literally falling upon itself. You could walk in at the ground level and touch the roof that had fallen 6 stories through the building before the renovation, and now it is actually home to a really vibrant community of artists. And in fact, by having permanent affordability built in, it ensures that the artists who are otherwise being priced out of downtown Lowell almost as quickly as we brought them in have the ability to actually remain in the community for the long haul. But in addition to the artists, our real vision starting in the late 90s and early 2000s was to try to attract residents into our downtown, in part on the heels of the artists, in part in conjunction with the artists, and in part for themselves, looking at one of the things that sort of creates an energy and a vitality to a downtown is having that 24-hour presence. And our downtown, like many, was and remains fairly active during the workday, but after 5 o'clock or on the weekends, there was very little going on in our downtown, so we needed to bring people who would be here at those hours. So there was a strong embrace of trying to bring residents into the city. This building is the Air Lofts, which was the first project. It was in 2000, the city owned the building. We had it appraised, had appraised value of about $10,000. And we also at the same time estimated the cost of removing the pigeon guano from what was then a vacant and abandoned building. That came in at $25,000. You can imagine the math on this is not looking so good. After we put out an RFP, we managed to get one response. Fortunately, that sometimes is all you need. And we had a very good developer, EA Fish out of Boston, took the project on. They had a lot of concerns initially, and we had to negotiate quite a bit with them. We even had to purchase a preservation easement on the building, which was cost $400,000, but was basically worthless because we already had significant historic regulation through the National Park and the Historic Board that was just as powerful, and they were going to use historic tax credits for the project anyway, so we didn't really need it, but it was a way to put some money into the project to ensure that it worked. Amazingly, once they started construction, They were able to raise the prices on the condominiums 3 times during construction, completely sold out before the project was even done. And suddenly, I think everybody realized that there was a whole market here that no one had tapped before. It was very underserved. And since that time, we have seen a number of buildings, both commercial buildings and mill buildings throughout our downtown, converted to new uses. And statistically, we have had a dramatic change in the nature of the residential makeup of our downtown. In 2000, when we started this process, as you can see, there were about 1,700 housing units, the vast majority of which were affordable housing, most of which was senior housing that was built in the 1970s under HUD contracts. And it was certainly a good thing for housing the elderly, but did very little for enhancing the economy and the vitality of downtown. So we set about a very conscious strategy of trying to increase the market rate housing in our downtown. But we also thought it was equally important that we make sure we did that without displacing anyone. And that's an easy thing to say. It was a lot harder of a thing to do, especially given that all of those HUD contracts from the 1970s were 30-year contracts that were expiring. And as we were building this tremendous market for private investment in market rate housing in our downtown, it would have been very easy for those developers to have let those contracts expire and converted those buildings to market rate. But we worked very hard, and I'm extremely proud to say that while we have dramatically shifted the balance of market rate to affordable housing in our downtown, we have done that without displacing a single unit of affordable housing that existed in 2000. And I think that balance is part of what makes a city healthy. It obviously was disproportionately imbalanced in 2000, but it would be also, I think, disproportionate and imbalanced, and ultimately may be detrimental to eliminate the affordable housing from the community, because I think there's one of the appeals of cities, and again, getting back to that dichotomy of are you trying to be a suburb or are you trying to be a city, but one of the appeals of cities, even to people who are not seeking affordable housing, is the diversity of the community. And diversity means a lot of things. It's cultural, it's ethnic, but it's also income diversity. People want a little bit, they want to come to cities to interact with people who are not necessarily like them. People like to go to suburbs to interact with people who are just like them. But people come to cities looking for a little more variety. There's nothing wrong with either choice, but if you are a city, you should be working to try to attract the folks that will naturally align with the interests of cities. But it has not all been just a residential strategy. Part of the focus of trying to attract the kinds of people who are interested in downtown housing and the kind of housing we can offer in a downtown is that they also tend to be the very sort of creative employees that are attractive to employers. And when we look at why the employers of today are making their location decisions, once upon a time they chose Lowell because we had a significant drop in the falls in the river that they could use for power. That's not very meaningful to people today. What's a whole lot more important to employers today is being able to attract and retain a workforce that will provide them with the kind of knowledge base that'll make them successful. And if you can be the kind of community that workforce wants to live in, you've got a whole lot better shot at attracting the businesses. And we've been able to do that. There's a number of cases here where many of these businesses have been attracted by that very thing, ranging from a small software company that moved from New Hampshire, literally telling us it was because they could not attract the workforce they needed in New Hampshire, but they could in Lowell, to Motorola making the decision to consolidate their New England operations in Lowell, in part because they felt confident that this was a place where they could attract the workforce they were looking for. Now, a couple of the things we've specifically done, I'll get through this real quick because I know I don't have a lot of time today, but a couple of the things we've specifically done in Lowell to make some of this successful. One is, in the introduction, we mentioned the changes to the city zoning code. That air lofts project that we were so proud of and we were actually pushing actually required 14 variances from our own zoning regulations in order to do, which told us that something was a little bit wrong if our own project isn't legal. So we went ahead and changed our zoning, and we established essentially a very simple set of criteria for doing the residential conversion of existing buildings. We took out all the dimensional requirements that made no sense, and we're back from that sort of suburban model. We require a single special permit that we basically give out like candy, and we require historic board approval to ensure a certain quality to the exterior of the building, and we require a minimum unit size to help ensure a certain quality to the interior of the building. And then we require that you identify one parking space per unit. And we say identify because that's pretty important. We don't actually require them to build it. In fact, we encourage people to lease all of the parking that they need in our own municipal parking garages. And at the time we started this, we had 4 garages in our downtown that were almost never used, and only one of which was open in the evening. We now have 5 garages that are almost all completely full, even at night. And the 5th garage was funded entirely from bonds that are being paid for out of the revenue from the first 4. So not only is this a good strategy for getting housing into your downtown, getting buildings redeveloped, it actually is a good economic strategy for financing your parking system. And then marketing is really important. And another thing that one does need to invest in if you're going to try to encourage any kind of development is a cohesive messaging around why someone would want to be in your community and who your target audience is. And trying to do creative things, if your target audience is creative people, trying to do creative things that will get a little attention is a key piece of that. One of the more interesting things we did was, at one point we took over a bar in downtown Boston that's quite popular with sort of young professionals. I don't think they knew what they were getting into that night, but we had the brokers and the developers of a lot of the downtown buildings set up shop around the bar. We set up a shop describing the city and basically tried to get people excited. What we were really looking for was to get the Globe reporter that we invited to run a good story to show that Lowell was kind of a progressive, interesting place. We did get that. Amazingly, we also had one of the developers literally sell a condominium unit that night at the bar. So I guess they were serving something pretty good. Now, all of that said, there is still one fundamental challenge that we have not come up with a really good solution to, and I think this is a challenge that Worcester probably experiences just like Lowell, and that is, in spite of the successes, there's just a fundamental disconnect between the costs of real estate development in gateway cities and the market returns that developers can expect, whether it be from office leases, whether it be from residential apartment rentals, or whether it be from condominium sales or anything else. The numbers just, for the most part, don't work. And they particularly don't work right now when the real estate market's not in a terribly good place. So every single project requires some kind of subsidy to make happen. And one of the things that we felt is the role of the public sector, but also the private sector in Lowell, is to try to figure out how to leverage some of those subsidies, how to make some of those projects happen. The single most important subsidy for our projects has been historic preservation tax credits at the federal and also now the state level, in basically changing that equation to one that may make sense from one that really doesn't make sense. And I think that really becomes, whatever you're seeking, whatever you're trying to get, whether it's housing, whether it's offices or anything else, one of the big challenges is to try to make sure that the market economics work. Now, one of the real long-term goals is that we can all benefit from our successes and change the nature of that market and not need to subsidize the projects going forward. But in the present, and certainly I think for the foreseeable future, places like Lowell and I imagine Worcester as well are going to need to be constantly battling with that, trying to close that gap. And it really requires a concerted effort of sort of all sectors of the community to work together to try to close those gaps and make sure that, that those projects can go ahead. So with that, I will turn it over to the next group.
Thanks very much, Adam. Our next speaker comes to us from Rhode Island, from Providence area, although he is a Worcester native, I understand. But Fran Leasis is a professor of political science and public administration at Rhode Island College in Providence. He holds a bachelor's degree from Holy Cross, so he is a crusader, a master's in history from UMass Amherst, and a master's in public affairs and doctorate in political science from the University of Connecticut. He's the author of articles and papers on nonprofit administration, urban politics, public budgeting and finance, and co-authored Providence, the Renaissance City, which he probably won't admit it, but I think he's here to do research on his next book about Worcester, but we'll see. He recently published an article in the Journal of Rhode Island History entitled Albert Martin's Journey from Rhode Island to the Alamo. So we'll see if Worcester can prove to be his Alamo. With that, I'd like to introduce Fran Leasis.
We are in competition with each other. Lowell and Providence and Worcester, but we're also together in our struggles to make sure the cities survive. How many people here have been to Providence in recent? Chamber of Commerce is very happy. Now, and why did you come? Did you come for the architecture? Did you come for the restaurants? Did you come for the retail? Those are all questions that a person would want to ask from Providence. And Providence made a very a decision many, many years ago, actually, that downtown was where its efforts were going to be focused. And the thought was, build downtown, it will move out to the neighborhoods. We also have to remember, as I show our PowerPoint, that Providence is the state's capital. Now, that positions it a little differently than Worcester does or Lowell does. But on the other hand, even though Providence for a long time has been called, Rhode Island has been called for a long time a city-state, the fact of the matter is, if you go back and look at the history of the Providence relationship with the state, it's always been contentious. The suburbs, rural areas have always dominated the state legislature, and so Providence has always been fighting for its political place in the state, although economically it has been the center of the state for many, many years. 16% of the state's workforce currently works in Providence. That's down, though, considerably, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So I have a PowerPoint. We'll kind of walk ourselves through it. Much of what Adam has to say in terms of the visuals are pretty much the same for Providence. Lots of before and afters, which I'm not going to show. I'm just going to go right into what our lessons are, so that you can kind of get a sense of what it takes from our perspective to do a Providence Renaissance. And then I'll take questions and answers with the rest of the panel. I do want to thank you all for inviting me. It is my hometown. I lived here for a long, long time. And when I moved to Providence in the 1980s, it was all dug up. And I was wondering, what in heaven's name did I do? But now I know. I was ready to write a book. So, you'll notice at the bottom the obligatory Charles Dickens Tale of Two Cities. You must have that in if you're an academic, otherwise you're proving you didn't read. And it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. And all of that kind of applies to what we want to talk about. And we have more than Worcester and Lowell and Boston and Providence here. It's really, the two cities are before Renaissance and after Renaissance, and kind of figuring out whether or not there is a difference between the two, beyond the physical differences. So, here are some of the issues. Being partly historian, I think you have to kind of locate yourself in why did Providence begin to do any of this at all? And, well, the 1960s, urban renewal was set to basically bulldoze the city. Urban renewal never happened in Providence. The mayor had no interest in it. You can see pieces of urban renewal, but for the most part, the plan to wipe out all of downtown never happened in Providence. It was a godsend in the long run. The monkeys escaped from Roger Williams Park Zoo in 1974, and while it's a little comic relief, on the other hand, newly elected Mayor Vincent Cianci used that as his metaphor for why the city needed to change, why it needed to reform itself. It was the same year the Biltmore Hotel, the last of the grand hotels in Providence, closed its doors. And most people in Providence at the time, and who I interviewed at the time, told me that they thought that was the end of the city. It was a symbol that the city was dead. In 1983, the Wall Street Journal called Providence a smudge on the road to Cape Cod, which, of course, offended lots of people because we had already spent millions of dollars by then, which we'll get to in a few minutes, and a delegation went to the Wall Street Journal editorial board and said, you're just wrong, and that actually pushed some of this effort along, this kind of negative national attention. Retail was dead by the 1980s. Not only was Denholm's dead in Worcester, and a whole bunch of others, so wasn't most every place but the outlet in the Shepherd's was hanging on by its fingernails. The city was near bankruptcy. It actually came close to declaring bankruptcy, and the middle class was fleeing as fast as it could. The tax base was eroded significantly. And last, there was no real city aesthetic. And this becomes a really important piece of the whole story. Our rivers were covered, all three of them. The city was a sea of parking lots and railroad tracks, and then there was this berm, which in Providence they called it the, quote, Chinese wall, end quote, which bisected the city. So the retail and commercial part of the city was separated from the governmental part physically, and there was no connection between the two whatsoever. This is just a picture of elephants, and you know, we kind of figured the monkeys had a plan, and that the elephants were the second part of the plan, but the elephants got detoured by peanuts and they got captured and they never rampaged through Providence. That was just so. Now these are the list of projects, and I'll just let this load up on itself. This all happened within a first one's in a 14-year period, and then after over a 20-year period. There was a significant amount of activity representing millions, well over billions of dollars, $1 billion in investment in that period of time. We'll talk about the nature of that investment. This is a picture of one area of the city. This was taken in the 1960s, and you can see the vintage cars, and this is the berm. You can sort of see it over there. And that extended throughout almost the entire core. There was the railroad tracks. Providence and Worcester Railroad, by the way, is an important part of the story, too. And there's still a major property owner in downtown Providence, and they owned most of what we now call Capitol Center. I don't think this picture came out as well. This is exactly the same spot, taken from the same vantage point. You can see the river's been uncovered. There's trees, there's planting, the traffic is moving differently, but you'll also notice there's no people. All right, and we'll get to this story in a minute. So, our job here today is to kind of point out to you what some of the lessons we learned in Providence from undertaking the effort. And the first lesson is that government does make a difference. And it made a difference in Providence in 3 ways. Money. Well over, between 1981 and 2000, there was $1.1 billion in federal, state, and local money, which leveraged from private money. And the part I want you to understand here is the private money followed the public money. All right? It wasn't the private sector coming forward, we want to do this. It was the public sector saying, we want to lay out a different infrastructure, and hopefully we will attract, you know, put out the money and they will come sort of arrangement here. Committed political executives and legislative delegations. It takes political leadership to make something like this happen. It's just not going to happen on its own. So the story of Providence Renaissance is the story of governors, of senators, of mayors, of city councils, of state legislatures, and actually of the federal legislatures, federal committees, working together with some kind of vision of what could become the city of Providence. And finally, agency administrators. And I mention these partly because I'm a public administration person at heart, but oftentimes those people who are actually given the task of implementing things are not given the credit. They're the ones who understand the regulations. They're the ones who understand the zoning laws. They're the ones who understand what can and can't be done under legislation. And oftentimes they're ignored in the story. So I'm saying one of our lessons, we learn to listen to them. Also, lesson number 2, understand mixed motivations. The private sector wants a financial return. So in any partnership, we have to keep that in mind. Number 2, political actors want something politically successful. No mayor wants to run on a platform as I failed. You know, it's always going to be, or no governor wants to run on a platform. We gave a lot of money away and nothing happened. That's nothing you want to run on. Administrators want professional recognition and a legacy, and I have a wonderful story about that I'll tell you later on in a Q&A period. And policy entrepreneurs want their project ideas to come to life. A policy entrepreneur is somebody who has an idea and won't let it go. And Providence was full of these people. The rivers would never have been uncovered if it wasn't for one person named Bill Warner. He just refused to give up the idea that we could uncover those rivers and move them and change the whole visual impact of Providence on people. Dan Lugosh, the developer of the Providence Place Mall, just refused to give up the idea that there could be retail and it could be successful in downtown Providence. And there are other people like that. They get this idea and they will not let it go until it happens. Forming contingent coalitions, which are temporary alliances, it became very important in Providence's story. And it started back in the 70s when new leadership started to emerge. They took on a few key projects and they worked. If you've come down to the Providence Performing Arts Center for any reason, that building was closed. It was the Lowell Theater. A small group of people got together, led by the Providence Foundation. They leveraged some money, And the important part isn't so much the Providence Performing Arts Center came about, it was that they learned how each other thinks and how they talked and what it took to get something done. The Biltmore Hotel was also rescued in a similar way. Partnerships, public-private partnerships are essential. That's a critical part of our story. Decision makers and project advocates must be willing to make accommodations, and sometimes the private interest has to be put below the public interest. Sometimes it works the other way too. Leadership must be able to mobilize quickly around well-vetted ideas. There were 7 plans in the space of 20 years drawn up for the city of Providence. None of them by themselves ever came to fruition, but pieces of them did. And you can drive to Providence today, and if I was giving you a tour, I can show you where the urban renewal is, where Providence interface is, and I can show you where the Capitol Center is. Pieces of it worked, but not everything did. But they were understood. The decision makers, oh, that fit with this, yes. And then they would put their effort behind something that they understood. Locality matters. Local dollars are important for seed money. And when I say local dollars, these are local private dollars. One of the stories behind the Providence Renaissance is that various actors could call each other up and say, I need $5,000 to get this plan done. I need $10,000. And these banks, primarily the Providence Journal, were locally owned and had a stake in what the outcome was. Individuals and organizations with a long-term historic and future stake in the city are important. The sense of civitas, and you know, it sounds like an academic term, but it's not. It goes back to ancient Greece, where people came together and made decisions together in the interest of the community. And that actually is a very important part of it. The wealth in the city, the old wealth in the city, stayed. It never left. They lived it. They literally lived on College Hill and were not willing to see the city collapse. And that's an important part of our story. When community leadership changes, new leadership needs to be ready. And that was the passing on of the oral tradition, the village's story. And that's what we're in right now in Providence, and we'll see the impact of that in a few minutes. Ideas matter. Plans are important because they contain visions, even if not fully implemented. And I just covered that a few seconds ago. The ideas of individuals matter and are often successful in spite of plans. I mentioned Dan Lugosh in the Providence Place Mall a few minutes ago. Just quickly, when Capitol Center was created, which is where the mall is located, the original plan for Capitol Center was for an office park. Retail was actually not permitted in Capitol Center. There was actually regulations that there will be no retail permitted. Right? Well, we began to think that that wasn't a real good idea. And so the Providence Mall came about because Dan Lugosh and a series of other people said, no, we have to change that regulation. We can have retail down here. And so we have a Providence Place Mall, arguably the most successful New England mall, because an individual refused to allow a regulation to stand in his way. We had to learn to form consensus around ideas. Leadership made a difference. There were a number of times when everything that you see in Providence, you've all traveled there, would not have happened if one political leader or one CEO had said no. There's a wonderful story of Bruce Sunland, who was the chairman of the Outlet Corporation at the time, was called by Senator Claiborne Pell about some federal money that was going to become available for moving railroad tracks. And they made this phone call, and they traveled up to the State House to talk to Governor Joe Garrahy about this. And Governor Garrahy said, okay, the state can get behind this. It all happened within a couple hours with Bruce Sunland driving his green Jaguar around the city. But they had a problem, and the problem was the mayor of the city at the time. This is in the late 70s, and the mayor was Mayor Cianci. And of course, the governor of the state and the mayor didn't speak to each other because they were political rivals. And what it took was Bruce Sunland and Senator Pell to drive down to Mayor Cianci's office and say, hey, the state's behind us. Will the city be behind it? If the mayor said no, we wouldn't have had the railroad tracks moved. The mayor said, well, who's paying for it? They said, the federal government. He said, why not? Be flexible. We created mediating institutions, or what I call mediating institutions. The most important of them was called the Capitol Center Commission. The Capital Center Commission was a mediating commission for just the reason I said before. The city and the state don't talk to each other very easily. So when 70 acres of land became available because we moved railroad tracks, how we governed that area couldn't be left in the hands of the state government or the city government. Nothing would have happened. So we created the Capital Center Commission, which was not staffed by political people, but by sort of neutral people who were more interested in preservation and architecture, and the preservation of self. That is, we had College Hill, a very historic area of the city, and we had the state capitol building, an architectural gem, and they became the focal point for any development in Capital Center. You had to preserve the historic fabric of the city. And that mediating institution exists to this day and is still the decision-making body over what gets built in Capital Center. And you have to be creative in resolving conflicts. 70 acres of land, there wasn't one eminent domain land taking. Land swaps were done. We'd still be in the court if we tried to go through eminent domain. And there's one example of some kind of creative decision-making that took place. You have to know the limits of your goals. The physical transformation of a city doesn't mean revitalization has happened. And you have to understand that. Looking good is only part of the story. And you have to understand that there's going to be unintended consequences that can and will result. The office park that we planned for Capital Center, there's only one office building, and that's 70 acres, the Citizens Bank Tower. It's now condominiums, it's a park, literally a park that was not planned, and retail. And that's changed the vision of what the city is. It's also changed the property tax base for the city. Developing success indicators, there's a bunch of them, and this is not an exhaustive list by any sense at all, but here we looked at business startups. Did all this activity create more businesses in the city? The answer is yes. Local unemployment rate, it's hard to tell about that because of current economic conditions, but it did drop. Retail sales went up. Why? Because that Shepherd's building and we're closing, but this mall appeared with Nordstrom's in it and Filene's and Lord & Taylor, and became a very expensive place to come shopping. And well, it's been the most successful mall in New England for a long time now. Assessed valuations and percent of taxable property in the base. The assessed valuations went up for a long time. We've tanked recently, and you might guess the reason why. It had nothing to do with what Providence did with the nation's economy. The percent of taxable property in the base, though, has become very problematic for the city. Again, not because of our activity. Over 50% of our property is not taxable in the city, and that's because there's an awful lot of tax-exempt property in the city, and that's because there's been a shift in the economy of the city away from manufacturing and finance to higher education and medical. And it's a cautionary tale, I suppose. Commercial and residential square footage increased. Unfortunately, because of economic conditions, the value of that has decreased pretty dramatically in recent years. Our bond rating in the city went up quite a bit. It's now moderating, let's put it that way. And we developed a series of social indicators like crime statistics, educational outcomes, and home ownership to kind of guide, well, what are we trying to accomplish beyond looking good? What kind of city do we have? The focus on downtown created a lot of pushback from the neighborhoods. Why didn't we get the investment? And just now, actually in recent years, that investment downtown is beginning to pay off for the neighborhoods. Unfortunately, because of the economic climate, that too is moderating. Lesson number 9 is hire a soothsayer. A person who can predict the easy movement of financial and technological capital worldwide. All of our banks in Providence are no longer owned locally. Technological capital, we communicate differently. Manufacturing is a very, very small percentage of our economy now. Where we used to be, where Brown and Sharp used to be, Those 6,000 jobs went away. Our jewelry industry, costume jewelry industry, is virtually non-existent, although it's all been gone. So we've had to replace it with something else.
Also, lesson number 2, understand mixed.
We have to predict the loss of locally controlled financial institutions. Predict the onslaught of a national housing collapse, which has devastated the city, and predict the worst economy since the 1930s. In other words, you have to have a crystal ball. These unanticipated consequences do have impacts on the city. Lesson 10, it's a long-term commitment. We've learned. Providence story began in 1957 with the rescue of College Hill from urban renewal and Brown University wanting to rip down a whole bunch of buildings. Literally, if you've been on Benefit Street at all in recent years, you'll see most of the properties up there are worth in the $500,000 to $1 million range. In the 1950s, they were slated for demolition because they were all derelict houses. It was a terrible neighborhood. They were all 18 of them were bought one afternoon by a woman named Elizabeth Chase, C-H-A-C-E, one of the old families. She was not allowed to let that happen. She partnered with Antoinette Downing, who was an architectural historian, and they had a vision for what this neighborhood could be and what its impact was in the city. And I can tell you, without Antoinette Downing and Elizabeth Chase, the Providence Renaissance would not have happened. They set the tone. We are not going to let this city die. And literally opened up the wallet and purse and bought a whole bunch of buildings and started to restore them. It continues today with the I-195 relocation project completion, and we now have 45 additional acres on the waterfront to be developed. And of course, this is not an easy decision what to do with the 45 acres, and we've created another mediating institution to try to help with that process. This is an area where the Knowledge District and the Medical District is going to be. Brown University has moved its medical school over there, which is a major change for Brown coming off the hill and moving across the city. RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, is moving across the river into this section of the city. So we are looking forward to how these decisions are being made, and we're also looking forward to seeing what the outcome will be. So I decided to say, well, what's happened in Providence since 2000? This is the list of projects that have happened in the last 12 years in Providence: the Renaissance Hotel, Water Place condominiums, purchase of Down City by Johnson & Wales. Literally, blocks have been purchased by the university. A move across the river by Brown and RISD, the reconstruction of the Dunkin' Donuts Center, which used to be the Providence Civic Center, and the Rhode Island Convention Center, the I-95. That was almost a $300 million project, by the way, the 45 acres. And the appearance of a medical district. Here are the conditions in Providence. The city's near financial collapse, dropping real estate values. The school system needs major intervention. Commercial square footage value is dropping. Sale of commercial buildings. However, there's a vibrant nightlife. Waterfire is our signature event and brings tens of thousands of people into the city every spring, summer, and fall. So in the long run, the Providence story reminds us that the right people from the public and private sectors need to be in the right place at the right time to bring projects to the table and to see them through to a conclusion when opportunity comes to make changes. You have to have this core of people who understand where you're going. And they have to have the requisite power and ability to make things happen. Understanding we're democracy and it gets messy. So with that, thank you, and turn it over to...
Thank you, Fran. And I apologize, but in the interest of time, Dima is going to keep his remarks short. But I do want to highlight that what Mayo Group is doing over on the south side of Franklin Street is proving the pundits wrong in many ways. It showed that an investment in downtown Worcester, that a committed approach could really start a transformation in a neighborhood. And I commend Mayo Group for their efforts, because they've recognized completely that it's not just housing, it's how do you build a community. And that's really where their vision lies and where they're headed. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dima. Dima Deitch is the marketing manager for Mayo Group. He's been responsible for researching, developing, and coordinating marketing-related initiatives, maintaining an ongoing knowledge of marketing trends and demographics, and collaborating with various departments to ensure the effectiveness of the company's marketing initiatives. Prior to his current position, Dima worked as a marketing manager for the Hamilton Company. He holds a BS in marketing from New England College of Business and Finance. Dima?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Tim McGurthy. Thank you to all members of the Research Bureau who are on this event. Thank you to all the members and attendees of the local businesses and Worcester government. A special big thank you to all the speakers today and the university for hosting the event. Our organization is very, very pleased to be here today. We do not have a PowerPoint today, but we have some slides here for you to look at. Mail Group is a Class A, full-spectrum, privately funded real estate firm. Our intriguing story originated nearly 2 decades ago with the purchase, renovation, and resale of a 3-family home in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Today, we own and manage nearly $350 million in residential assets, 1 million square feet of commercial, office, retail properties, and a chain of sports bars called Stadium. Our portfolio stretched nationwide into 8 states. Yet the basis of our business model is consistently reflected from the initiation of our organization. The model is simply defined as opportunity. Unlike most asset management and development firms, Mail Group maintains primary focus on areas that are considered challenging real estate markets. We pride ourselves in purchasing assets that have become extremely distressed from poor operations or mismanagement of funds, and revitalizing them into something aesthetically wonderful while enriching the community. Bottom line, our core focus is ground-level operations. With nearly a decade of due diligence and constant outreach, we purchased our first asset in Worcester in 2004, the old bankrupt hotel, which at one point in its 100-year-plus history was one of Worcester's most prominent, was one of the most prominent hotels in the country. Understanding the demand for residential housing in downtown Worcester, over the course of the next 3 years, we purchased 6 more mixed-use properties that all directly abut each other, all in downtown. In 2008, we purchased the far-distressed Bancroft Motors Vehicle Sales and Service Center, located on Portland Street. As we finalize the 100,000-plus square foot building conversion from commercial use to 82 apartment homes, the new luxury downtown apartment community will be one of Worcester's finest residential apartment home communities in nearly 2 decades. By 2012 end, our organization will own and manage 473 apartment homes, 65,000 square feet of commercial property, and 343 parking spots, respectively, throughout the downtown area. I really want to reiterate that our organization knows there is tremendous opportunity in downtown Worcester. With the quantity of development, the wonderful city government personnel, and the vision for the prosperous future of Worcester's businesses, there will be tremendous need for residential housing. And the smaller photo here, actually, to your left, is sort of the darkened campus of our entire portfolio. Our residential portfolio maintains 94% occupancy year-round with an average market rent of $910 throughout the original 6 communities and $1,325 market rent in our new Portland Street Lofts community. Our new community maintains 100% occupancy on the 59 units that have been delivered by our construction team to date. We have 0 residents that are on state-subsidized programs, and our delinquency and eviction rates are below 4% on an annual basis. Our goal is not to increase the volume of residents that call our communities home. Our goal is to increase retention rates of those that already live with us. Mr. Tim McGurthy alluded to this a little bit. Our challenge lies within the lack of amenities and lifestyle value businesses that specifically abut our marketplace. We hear from the speakers today representing Lowell and Providence. Downtown style lifestyle, whether in the Worcester marketplace or somewhere else, is always perceived as a vibrant and exciting area to call home, with multiple cafes, restaurants, shops, and other businesses that caters to one's needs. Our resident turnover ratio is a challenge that constantly haunts us. We have 58% moving out from the Worcester area every year. It's 35% more than the average turnover than any other community we own and manage. We are excited to see more and more businesses calling this area home as we continue to overcome our challenges. Our communities maintain a 1,200-person market resident base, which is comprised of 15% students ranging from undergraduate to graduate, from 9 area colleges, 70% working professionals, and approximately 10% empty nesters or senior citizens. Our aspirations as an organization for the next 3 years is to continue to maintain our wonderful relationships with our local organizations and build our residential portfolio by 4 times its current position, specifically in Worcester. In addition to bringing our flagship Stadium sports bar location here and a 24-hour retail health and fitness center to downtown, we've already initiated the pre-planning for additional housing through a full-scale luxury high-rise that will maintain nearly 500 units, doorman services, industry-leading amenities, and class-leading market rents. And you can see some of that in our photos that we brought for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dima. And I do want to reiterate, he kept it short in the interest of time, but it's really an amazing story going on around the Worcester Common area with City Square, the Mayo Group development, the Theater District Initiative. We've got a lot of activity going on, specifically targeted towards creating that vitality in the downtown of an 18 to 24-hour city. But with that, I do want to open it up to questions. I want to make sure people have an opportunity. I think what the kind of breadth of the speakers here is kind of given us some insight into the efforts that Lowell have done over the last 20 years, the efforts that Providence has undertaken, and then some of the new efforts going on in Worcester. And I think that the key piece of this is, construction is an important part of all this, but it also goes to that vitality in the people that were mentioned as well by Professor Leeses, that it needs to be, a downtown needs to be a gathering place. It needs to be a place that people are drawn. And I think, to me, that's an important lesson, and one that we as a city need to focus on in how do we engage more people with our downtown. But with that, I'd like to open it up to the speakers and see if anybody has any questions for our panelists.
My question is sequencing between office development, housing development, and retail development. Is there a usual pattern that these things follow? And if not, what are the variables that might make it that one gets to come earlier? And then as you presented Providence and Lowell, we got the idea that Providence is on the upswing, and Lowell may have done what it did already, and if government got out a little too far, or if retail got out a little too far when the national economy goes down, that there's no longer the infrastructure of disposable income in the city to support those kind of things that were invested in. So what's the sequencing of development is really my major question. How do you make sure you get it long-term right? And what are the variables that will let retail exist, for instance, or not exist within the other development variables?
Well, just to use this right. Okay, the sequencing in Providence was is an interesting one. We did the infrastructure projects first, and that led to some changes. The housing piece is the last. All right, the retail came in between. Now, the Providence Place Mall is an interesting story on this. There was a lot of objection to the mall going in by existing retail property owners in the down city, what was called the down city area. And it wasn't until they dropped those objections that the mall could go forward. It turned out that the mayor of the city at the time, who was not Mayor Cianci, was Mayor Paolino, was a major property owner, and he was the one who pulled the trigger and said, okay, we're willing to see the remaining retail go down in favor of the mall. But what made the mall possible was the political and economic dynamics of malls. I learned you had to have three major events in there. Nordstrom's was the key. And an entire delegation from the city and state flew out to Seattle, met with the Nordstroms, and convinced them to come. Nordstrom's would only come not because of the dollars in the city, but a 100-mile radius outside the city. And of course, that included Boston suburbs. That's what made Nordstrom's ability to come, likely to come, and that's what made the mall really financially possible for the city. There was a big battle within the state, by the way, over the actual building of the mall and the garage for the mall. And the mall pays no property taxes, by the way, to the city. It does pay state income, state sales tax through sales to pay back the bonds that were floated to build the garage. So it's the retail came sort of second after the infrastructure, and housing is to follow. Down city, just a little example, do you put a supermarket in down city for the condominiums that have followed? And we tried that and the market failed. Now a new market's down there and it seems to be succeeding in liquor stores and fine wine stores, I should say, and florist shops. And that kind of retail is beginning to follow the investment in the loft retail, which followed the retail, the mall retail.
So I would provide a slightly different answer to the question. And I think the question of which comes first between office and residential is really more a factor of the market forces and what you can facilitate. But I would say that retail falls into two categories. And retail of the type that the Providence Place Mall embodies is retail of a regional nature that is destination retail. And it can lead if you can do it on that scale. But there are very few opportunities to do it on that scale, and I would argue that because Providence has done it, that probably means Worcester would have difficulty doing it, because you're actually trying to reach into the same larger region. The other kind of retail, which is really the retail that Lowell has focused more on, without any assistance or subsidy or support, necessarily follows office and residential development, because retailers only go to a place where there is a market. And that in this day and age, downtowns are no longer the malls of their era that they once were, where they were the regional destination retail for a region. That ship has sailed, for better or worse. What retail in downtowns now is basically the kind of lifestyle amenities and sort of lifestyle restaurant retail experience that relies on a base market that is very in close proximity and ideally walkable to it. So you have to attract that market to the walkable area. It's not enough to, it's almost impossible. You need 1,000 housing units to support one block of retail. So you need a tremendous amount of it to be the only market. But you need it to be a base in the same way that a politician needs a base to get elected. It's not enough to get elected, but without it, they can't even start. Then once you have that base, then those retailers can draw on a little bit of a larger area. One of the things that Lowell realized, though, as we were trying to attract residential, in the early years of doing that, 12 years ago or so, we really had almost no retail in our downtown that was going to be attractive. And one of the things we were supposedly trading on in trying to attract the residents was the idea of a kind of urban vitality, which is in part driven by storefront retail and restaurants. So we realized that we didn't yet have the market, but we thought we were building the market. So what we did was we got together with a number of our local lending institutions. Fortunately, we still have a number of locally owned lenders in Lowell, and formed a venture fund partnership that would loan money to startup retailers in a manner that protected, the city made a significant investment in it and protected the lender's money, but we were able to expand the amount of money we could offer by incorporating the lender's money into the pool, and we shielded the lenders as well by having it be a pool, so no one of them was into any one loan very much. And we ended up making loans to over 30 businesses, that none of which would have gotten a loan from any of the participating banks by themselves. And ended up creating the retail that ultimately created that vitality. But it had to be artificial. It was not going to happen on its own. Most of those businesses have become stable as a result of the residential development that came sort of with them or in conjunction with them.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning. I'm Jill DeGillis, and I'm the director of a large nonprofit here in downtown in the shabby chic Denholm building. And a huge fan of downtown development and the success of balancing the economics. I didn't hear any reference to working in partnership with nonprofits. We have a strong network of nonprofits here, as is true in your cities as well. And I'm interested to know in any creative solutions of the service industry of nonprofits, partnering a nonprofit building, and figuring out creative ways to serve the folks that we work with in the nonprofit industry with the rest of the development that you've talked about. Thanks.
In part, the Providence Renaissance was dependent on a nonprofit. The Providence Foundation, which was not a service agency, but it was an agency designed to build the city. It was failing in its until 1973, 1974, when the National Endowment for the Arts put out an RFP for urban planning, and they became the partner. So one opportunity for the nonprofit sector in that way appeared almost immediately, and they became the recipient for money to develop what was called Interface Providence at the time, and that became yet another plan. But it was also one of those coalescing moments. The other nonprofit community, which has a huge impact, of course, in Providence right now, is both the medical and the higher education communities, because of the property tax issue that they present. Downtown Providence has a number of nonprofit social service agencies as well, because the populations in Providence are very, very, very varied, but they haven't been central to decisions around what does the city look like, what is the city's purpose. They're part of the conversation, but they don't drive the conversation.
Say pretty much a similar story in Lowell. Obviously, there's some major nonprofit organizations like the university, the community college, and 2 hospitals in the city that have been key partners in most of these initiatives. In fact, in many cases, large investors themselves. I would also point to the Lowell Community Health Center as a nonprofit that is making a significant investment in downtown Lowell right now of a $40 million facility. And we actually see that as a real asset and part of the revitalization of the city, in part because they're going to be bringing 300 fairly good jobs to the city and adding another 100 in the process of growing into that space that they're facilitating. And those doctors and nurses and administrative staff contribute to the economy of the downtown in a way that's very healthy and very positive. And certainly the patients that the substantial number of patients they bring to the community is a welcome thing as well. I would also echo, though, that there are other nonprofits that provide services that have a value and a purpose, and are not necessarily a negative thing, but they can't really be looked to as I don't see them having played a significant role in the revitalization of the city. And I think it's really a question of which set of metrics are you using and what sorts of things are you looking at. And if you're looking at the question of the sort of revitalization of the city, I don't think you look to the social service agencies as having been a big part of that, which is not to say the social service agencies don't have a purpose or a place that's a positive one in the overall matrix of the community.
Councilor?
Currently, the City Council is struggling with the issue of income diversity in its housing projects. And that has to do with the issue of either having a cap or controlling the numbers of publicly financed housing units. We have in the city of Worcester reached beyond the 10% quota that the state uses as a threshold. We're at 13 or 14%. And I'm just wondering, because you refer to the fact that you have to deal with in Lowell the market rate versus the affordable rate of housing. Now, we do have in Worcester a very significant nonprofit and affordable housing sector construction entities, the CDCs. We are bonded to them, by the way, because they've done such great jobs. How do you overcome that and actually get them to cooperate with you in looking at the bigger picture in terms of getting income diversity and having a housing policy that's not weighted in favor of affordable housing?
I think we have a CDC in the city at the moment, and we have a number of organizations that do affordable housing in the city, and they do very good work, and they are part of the overall picture. But when we're talking about the revitalization of downtown, we don't turn to them as the partner that's going to help improve or shift the balance of market rate to affordable housing. We've had those conversations with them, and they've basically told us that it really isn't their mission to build market rate housing. It's their mission to serve a certain population in the community. And in the process, one of the things that they do when they do their projects in locations where it is where they can reach the population they're trying to serve is there's a simultaneous benefit where their projects tend to be the most attractive, well-managed, and sort of physically, aesthetically best properties in the area. And in certain areas, certain neighborhoods of the city, that's an important step in changing the nature of those neighborhoods. And that's an important role beyond, again, the core role, which is also important, of providing housing to people who have a need for it. but those are not necessarily the partners that we turn to when we're trying to improve the market rate housing in the city. And one of the things we've found, I mentioned at the end, that one of the big challenges in attracting the kind of market rate development we're looking for is the disconnect, the economic disconnect between the cost of doing real estate development and the returns the market will bear at this point, or will provide at this point. And one of the ways we found to help close that gap in the housing industry, at least, is to work with for-profit housing developers to do projects where 10 or 20% of the units in a much larger project are affordable, which allows the introduction of subsidy into the project that makes the economics work so that you can get the 80% or so of the project that's market rate to happen. And in that sense, utilizing some of those tools and supporting some of those tools actually achieves a very different goal while still providing for some of the housing need in a way that ultimately creates the kind of population mix that has the healthy diversity, but also an income capacity that can support retail and so forth in the community. Lowell also enjoys a 13 or 14% on the DHCD 40B list as well, and we've never contemplated the idea of a cap, but we also don't, actively recruit 100% affordable housing deals into the city either.
If I could just add to that, Deeman, would you mind speaking a bit to the risk-reward relationship as a market-driven, unsubsidized housing developer in Worcester?
Before he answers that question, as part of the answer, I would love to know what attracted Mayo Group to Worcester.
Thank you for the question. Yes, specifically in Worcester, we are a all market rate asset management firm here. We truly do find the value, and Adam had alluded to the fact that we actually do find the ROI, the return on investment, on the market rate units, because we are able to overcome the challenge from the construction and the renovation standpoint. We find that in our marketplace here, there is a need for upscale housing, and because we're able to achieve the renovation standpoint from purchasing the distressed asset, and then ultimately releasing a quality home back to the marketplace at a very low cost from the construction standpoint, we are actually able to achieve a significant ROI on our investment. So our value business here is actually specifically on the market rate units. We do not have, we do not find value on the subsidized or the affordable units.
Why did you come to Worcester, though?
It's an interesting question. The owner of our organization actually, his roots actually, not his original roots, but family roots actually tie into this area, and he's actually always found the value out here for housing in this downtown marketplace.
If we could finish up with the last question, Deb.
Oh, thanks. I'm dying to ask because we struggle with having the Blackstone River start here, but we can't see it, and there's been discussion about how much does water play a real role in economic development, and do we really need to have a section of canal to look at or not?
Well, we're a waterfront city, and in Providence we turned our back on the waterfront for a long, long time. We're a merchant maritime community from 1636 to the 1830s, when the Blackstone Canal was collapsed, actually, and the railroads took over. Do you need water? James Rouse, architect planner, was famously quoted as saying people love water. And that's true to a large extent, but I have to tell you this. Water Place Park in Providence opened in 1994. The problem with Water Place Park was there was nobody there. Water Place Park didn't become a signature event for Providence until Waterfire started, and that wasn't the first Waterfire, forgetting the 1994 New Year's Eve one, was in 1997 with the Convergence Art Festival, and then after that became a signature event, and that's what drives people down there. But to this day, Water Place Park itself, during the course of the day, there's not a lot of people walking around down there. I constantly walk or run down there, and it's a very nice place. So if Rouse is correct, people love water, yes, you should have some water. Should you develop the canal? That's a local decision. I can tell you, for a long, long time in Providence, it's been unknown that there is about a 200-yard stretch of the Blackstone Canal almost untouched in the North Burial Ground, which is what drove me to do another piece I've been writing. And nobody goes there. It's in a cemetery.
Okay.
Are some of the most successful cities around the world water-based? Sure. You know, Paris, Amsterdam.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the speakers, Adam Backey, Dima Deitch, Fran Leases. I want to thank the Research Bureau for allowing us this opportunity. I want to thank the sponsors, Polar Beverages, Commerce Bank, Fallon Community Health Plan, for the opportunity to have this discussion. It's something that we as a city, a government, appreciate this opportunity, as I said at the beginning, to really kind of evaluate where we are and where we need to go next. So thank you very much.